Okay, hello everyone. Today we are going to just unpack a little bit about the History O-Level 2017 paper. All right, let's unpack each and every question and we'll talk about the requirements of the question. So for question A, it is about what you can learn. So it is actually an inference question, but it is a specific inference question, meaning I am actually looking at the industrialization in Soviet Union. So those are the keywords that I am or I will be looking for. All right. Now, the next one is, of course, a purpose question, and I think this would be the easiest for 2017 history paper. It's just a why, okay? But except that when we look at the source, there is something that is again very specific that they are looking for. Now, for question C, it is really about how useful is the source as evidenced about Stalin's industrialization policy. So you need to have some sort of contextual knowledge of what is Stalin's industrialization policy. Of course, it is part of the bigger collectivization, but what is the industrialization policy? How has it benefit? How it has not benefit? All right. Now, for question D, you must know before anything else, all right, because this is a using two sources, you need to know specifically what the German newspapers say. So you need to establish that first before you know whether or not Stalin was lying. Okay, and specifically this is one of the harder questions. So you can see that it is sort of tiered from inference, purpose, utility. This is literally compare contrast, but it is of a bit of reliability involved. Okay, and of course the last question is a very easy question, whether or not the policy of industrialization was successful. But because they put the adjective extremely successful, we are literally looking for something that is quite extreme. Has it been extremely successful, and then why? Okay, so moving on. Now, again, background information is very important for you to study, for you to look at, especially for those of you. You must remember that in O level, you may not study this topic, so at least the background information is for you to remember certain things. So the ones that I underlined literally show you some examples of how Soviet Union actually became one of the world's greatest industrial powers, and specifically it took them only just 10 years. So these are perhaps better contextual knowledge in comparison when you want to compare when you want to use it as contextual knowledge, you can also use the background information. Now let's take a look at source A. Now source A is again an extract written by a wife of a locomotive driver. A locomotive driver is just, I think, a big truck. All right, and she was writing to the wife of another driver. And if you look very carefully, she actually talks about how not all the rail transport workers are achieving their targets. Okay, and specifically his locomotive, his vehicle has frequently breakdown, always dirty, and he's always overconsumed fuel. All right. However, her husband, that means this person who wrote the letter, said that her own husband exceeds the targets, receive prizes. Okay, and she sort of commands or asks her friend to talk to her husband, right? Because everybody need to work together. All right, so let's take a look. Okay, so first of all, the idea about inference is you would already establish that, first of all, industrialization was not successful, all right? Because one, all of them will not be able to achieve their targets, okay? Whereas the second bit here, you can actually see that, industrialization was successful because Stalin set very high standards, okay? And because he set very high standards, he needs to inspire people, so he put in that reward system. Right now, another inference, I think some of you actually wrote this inference, but it just was not very clear. It's about the competitive nature of the policy. All right, that means you reward when you work hard. So there is that aspect of competitiveness. Okay, so take a look. There are a few inferences here. Industrialization was successful. Another inference is not successful because due to all these problems. And other inference is literally about competitive nature of the policy or even meritocracy if you really think very carefully. Stalin reward people who were able to go beyond their expected output or quota. Okay? Now, moving on, I think this was quite easy. The only thing is I want you to focus that it comes from a very economic thing, all right? So it's not really about Stalin per se, but it is about his policies that was actually very beneficial. Okay, and of course, the simple basic one is, this is a propaganda picture. Is he able to answer those kind of things? Okay, so what were the answers that I was looking for? Right, for this paper, literally is about to encourage the Russian people to increase production or to praise Stalin to come up with such a policy, right? And of course, the outcome would be to encourage um, plans, okay, specifically high production records to ensure the success of Stalin plans, or it is about to aspire to become Stakhanovites, okay, who actually work really, really hard. So I think those were possible outcomes that we accepted. Right, so one of the most important things when you do any specific suspicious question is really to look at the provenance, right? Okay, so now for this question is about how useful is Stalin's speech. All right, a very perceptive student will actually already know that it is a Stalin speech. So there will be tinges and there will be aspects where it is actually, I would say, biased, but let's take a look. Okay, now this source is useful because it does claim that life has become better. All right, life has improved, there's more jobs, there is higher rates of output, and hence you have the hero and heroine. So this is for a lot of you would have answered this, and it is quite clear. All right, now why is this source then not useful? Because first, it is an extract from a speech by Stalin, and obviously common logic that he wouldn't say anything that is bad about his policy specifically. All right, and adding on anything negative will not motivate the workers in any conference. Okay, so you can Google it up and see what does all union conference of Stakhanovites actually mean. All right, but it is basically sort of where they get the recognition. All right. So moving on, this is an example of the answer. The source is useful, okay, and then you give me source details, and then you give me explanation. And this is actually supported when you look at cross-reference to actually source B, where Stalin honors the people, okay, and they were given some sort of recognition. All right, and since source B supports source C, it enhances its trustworthiness and reliability. So a lot of you will have an R at your paper because you didn't link back. There was no link. Okay. Now it is not useful because it is a speech by Stalin. It is in 1935. All right, but still this concept is very important for you to remember. Okay, not useful if you can see specifically that it is biased, then of course do this paragraph. All right, it makes more sense, doesn't it? All right, why would you want to write something that is useful and then suddenly change it to not useful? So you're very confident about your not useful questions, then I think you need to review certain things. All right, for the next question, what is interesting is you definitely need to know what the German newspaper says. Okay, why must a German newspaper report this information, and specifically, why does the year matter? All right, so I want you guys to look at source D and source E, and specifically if you look at the year, um, source E was taken 5 years later. All right, but if you look very carefully at source D, because it is a speech by Stalin, a lot of positive positive characteristics of industrialization came out in his speech. Okay, and he said he made a few claims. He said about 48% of the overall economy to 70% in 1932. Okay, and specifically, whatever the plans that they have been achieved, and now it is definitely very successful. So source D does show you that, oh, okay, it's very, very successful. Now let's take a look at source E. It is a German newspaper. So why 1938? It is actually to show you that both these two countries are almost going to be very tensed, okay? And 1939 is where we actually signed the non-aggression pact, okay, between China, so sorry, between not China, but between Soviet Union as well as Germany. Okay, so 1939, Nazi Soviet non-aggression pact. Okay, now, so if you look at this, however, this German newspaper is sort of, how do I say it? Very suspicious about whatever that was mentioned in Stalin's claims, okay, and they literally said that, you know, in, well, even though here doesn't really quote, but 1937 specifically, okay. Now here, actually, if you look very carefully, they said that the calculations must have been only 73.1 thousand million rubles, and 30% below the plan. So that means um, industrialization, as what Stalin claimed in source D, is not happening. All right, and yet concerning the production for 1936, it says that yes, the figure did reach, and it was actually, I mean, it was a success. Okay, um, but at the same time, in 1937, there was setback. Okay, so I think a lot of students were writing about, oh, um, whatever that source E said, it is actually very, very useful because of how the source is and who actually mentions, who's actually the creator, which is actually Stalin. Okay, so yes, the German newspaper, what the German newspaper say in source E does mean that Stalin has been lying. So you must find a source that is contradictory. Okay, so for example, um, you can see here, right? Source E contradicts, okay? And then da, 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 da. This means that industrialization was not successful, and this contradicts what Stalin say, which from the source claims that it is this. So you need to find contrasting, because that will mean that, you know, Stalin may have been or must have been lying. Okay, now what other aspects is actually specifically, if you really think very carefully, obviously, while the other source, okay, uh, source E, for example, does show the aspects that Soviet Union is not developing as well. Okay, but what is interesting is because source D is actually from Stalin, so obviously from the get-go you would know that, oh, okay, whatever that was written by the German newspaper really does not match. Okay, so that means it really does show that Stalin was lying because there was a hidden agenda. Okay, so just take note about that. Okay, so it's not such a hard question, but it requires a bit more thinking on your part. Okay, so let's take a look at source F. All right, and if you look very carefully, nothing, but again, you must remember that if you're doing question E, then definitely you need to read all the sources. Okay, now for this question, I think a lot of you did really, really well. It's just that I think I would just need a bit of time for you to read about the linking. So a lot of you could actually give suggestions, a lot of you could actually give the explanation of source details, but don't mix up again source details, explanation, um, and the link, right? The extra part. Okay, so some of you actually need to work on how you actually code source details. Okay, and some of you would definitely need to learn how to um, try to incorporate the bonus. I think for some of you, you've already been doing that. So remember, one yes, one no, and make sure that at least you are able to question the reliability of one of the source. I think that will really help polish your answer, and it does give the examiners a different perceptive or perception of you as a candidate. Okay, so you can refer to the answers which will be given, and understand that time management is actually important in any mock paper. Okay, so all right, see you again next time. Bye bye.